Hello there, everyone. This is Miriam from Pain Outside the Box, and today's video is going to be a little bit different. As you can see already, I've got a guest here with me. This is Gary McKean from New Zealand, and his story really inspired me. Gary has gone through long COVID a couple of years ago. He has recovered fully. And as we were talking the other day, some of the things that he was mentioning about his recovery, how severe his state was before he learned about mind-body syndrome, it really inspired me. And I really, really wanted to share this with my audience here on YouTube, because I think that a lot of people these days still have side effects from long COVID. Some people are still looking for a solution. Some people have developed chronic fatigue syndrome, which is quite similar to the symptoms that one experiences from long COVID. And actually, we've come to see that the healing approach can be very similar by tapping into the mind-body connection. So I think it's going to be a fascinating episode today. And without further ado, I'm going to leave it up to Gary to introduce himself. Let us know how he came into this world. And also, Gary, let us know how you first heard about TMS, mind-body syndrome, what got you into it, and when you were suffering.
Okay. Thanks, Miriam. Yeah, I'm Gary. I live in a small town called Wanaka in New Zealand. So it's maybe 10,000 people. It's a very beautiful place. There's mountains around with skiing and a lake beside. So it's quite a peaceful, natural environment.
I actually didn't know, Gary, that you lived in Wanaka. I've been there once. It's amazing.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, it's
amazing.
Not hard to like. So a lot of people who live around here are quite active, sports, cycling, skiing, outdoor activities, and I'm also a little that way inclined. For me, is maybe hiking and hunting. So I'm quite active, and that's how I was. I have been for several years when we were living here up until 2022, when this journey started for me. So in beginning of June 2022, I caught COVID. The day before, I'd been on an 11-hour hunting trip, so I was quite fit and well right up until that point. And then I got there's, I think, just normal flu-like symptoms, really. I wasn't really hit any harder than anyone else, I don't think, with the initial infection. I've had probably worse flus before, but it was 5-6 days, I guess, of fever and uncomfortable and malaise. And it was, I just thought it would pass. The rest of my family had it at the same time, and we just curled up for a bit and thought that's it. I did, so it took a little bit long, it was maybe for the next 2 weeks. I sort of had some sort of lingering, I just wasn't right. I didn't have the right energy, but I thought it's just, it'll clear up. It had cleared up with the rest of my family members, and 3 weeks after the initial infection, I went out on a trip with a friend. So it was quite a heavy exertion for 3 days. And during that time, I realized I was nowhere near my normal physical level. And when I came back, I was shattered, basically. And that's when I realized that there's something else up from a normal recovery of a viral illness. As time progressed, I guess, over the next month or two, things steadily got worse for me. So I had I started off with sort of mild fatigue, and that increased. It was quite debilitating in the end. I had breathlessness. I had POTS. I had a sensitivity to heat and cold. And so those were more on a physical level. And then cognitively, I was starting to get affected as well. So it started off just with little periods of losing concentration, and developed into, not quite being able to find the right words sometimes. And then it was starting to affect my daily life. I was working, but I was finding it increasingly difficult to continue working because I couldn't remember what I was hearing, and I was struggling to concentrate. So these symptoms all sort of came on, and sometimes like the fatigue would also affect my mind, and the symptoms in my mind would affect my body. I'd feel them as well. There was also kind of anxiety going on. And so initially I knew of long COVID, and so after about 5 weeks, I guess, I went to a doctor and said, "What's wrong?" And she said it's too early to tell if I had long COVID, but the symptoms I was exhibiting at that time were consistent with that. But she said, just wait off a little bit. So I did, and I sort of just tried to carry on with my life, but I wasn't doing much outside of my work. And the fatigue and the physical restrictions became more and more, where I realized that I couldn't do very many of I could do sort of my existing daily activities, but I couldn't ride a bike or do anything like that, for instance. So that was completely out of the question. And cognitively, I realized that I wasn't able to actually say the words that I was thinking when I was what I wanted to say. So I would.
That's scary.
It was it really was a very unnerving time, because I had in my mind what I wanted to say, but what actually came out had a different meaning. And I couldn't quite understand that. And eventually it was affecting my work, and I couldn't concentrate at work. When I was working, I would have to lie down every hour or so. And mentally, I just couldn't I was having difficulty taking stuff in. So I guess after about 2.5 months, I went back to the doctor, and she said, it seems fairly consistent with long COVID, deteriorating. And I said, what do they have for that? And she said, well, nothing really, just resting and pacing, really. She was quite honest and said that medically they have nothing pharmaceutical, and no recommended treatment. So I didn't really take that well. I was like, I wanted to be well, or to be doing something that could that I thought might improve my situation. So I sort of scaled back my life a bit more, and eventually around the 3 month mark, I actually had to stop work. I was unable to read at all. I could read the words, but maybe if I read a paragraph, I couldn't remember it after I read it. Oh. So I couldn't take anything in like that. And that was really scary, because, whether it was a book or the internet, I couldn't use anything.
But at the same time,
felt.
this is what I find inspiring about your story, because despite the fact that you could barely even read a book, like you still managed to learn about mind-body syndrome eventually. So, and I hear a lot of people, like even online on groups, saying like, I have brain fog, I have chronic fatigue. It's too much for me to read like a Sarno book or a TMS book. But you did it. So how did that happen?
How did that happen? Yeah. Okay. So eventually, I stopped work, and I was also physically almost reduced to sitting around all day. I was sitting in a beanbag. So the physical limitation as well as the cognitive was very frustrating. It was sort of watching my life tick away, and I wanted to try and find someone else who had recovered from long COVID, but I was unable to do it myself. So what happened is my wife stepped in for me. I was really lucky, and she put a lot of energy into being my eyes and ears and searching for me on the internet especially. And it was really quite difficult in the beginning to find anyone who had recovered. There was a lot of information about recovery, but there was very little on recovered. And eventually she found a couple of websites. One was a Norwegian one, and another one, I can't remember the actual address of them now, but they both had a collection of stories of people who had recovered from CFS or long COVID, and a number of other, what I now know as mind-body complaints, you can say. So that was great news. She found these for me, but I wasn't able to read them. So I just stored that away for the time being. And I went to the doctor again, and so this time I said, look, in spite of all the symptoms that I'm experiencing, fundamentally, I really don't think there's anything wrong with me. And I don't know why I thought that, because it was...
Your inner guidance, your intuition.
It was only intuition, yeah. And we both had a laugh because she says, you're a wreck, essentially. But she supported me, and she says, you know what, I don't think there is either. And so she said, let's do the test and see. So we did, bloods and ECG and X-ray, lung X-rays and all this. And they all come out perfect. It was, according to the test results, there was nothing wrong with me. And I found that quite comforting. And I asked her at that time, what could possibly be responsible for these symptoms I've got. And she said, it's possible all of the ones that I were displaying could all be caused by a dysregulated autonomic nervous system. And I was like, okay, that's good news. I've only got to fix one thing.
Yeah,
she says, yes.
That's great.
That's right. She says, but we don't have a pill or something that you can take that fixes that. It's a process. So that went on and planted the seed in my mind. And she suggested that I needed to sort of even scale my life back even a bit more to try and get some more energy back. So at that time, I moved out to a caravan by the lake on my own. It's not that I didn't have a supporting environment at home. It was very supporting, but I just wanted to be alone. And I was sleeping a lot, and I just wanted to dial back my life to the very basics to try and get my energy levels up. So that actually happened. It took about 2 weeks. I was doing very small walks and cooking for myself, and that was probably it. And I did at that time start a breathing routine called Batiko breathing, which was also my wife referred to me, and it was a really good. It's something that I could do. There was not many things I could do in the condition I was, but that's something that I could do.
Could you repeat the name of the technique?
Yeah, it's called Buteyko.
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 Okay.
It's there's some very good information online about it, and it has a number of benefits actually, but one of the ones is that it can help regulate your nervous system as well. So I practiced that and regained energy enough that I could start to read again. Not very much. So I read some of these stories of recovery, and one of them was from a woman named Esther, a Dutch woman. And so I read a few, but they were all a little bit, I wouldn't say vague, but they didn't have specifics about how they recovered. They were mostly referring to a kind of mind-body approach, but that to me, I couldn't quite work out what that meant. It was a bit too broad. But this one particular woman called Esther, she actually made a particular reference to a podcast by Nicole Sachs, who was interviewing a woman called Lika, who had long COVID, and she had listened to this podcast and it had benefited her tremendously. So that was my first solid link into something tangible that I was like, well, maybe I could start with that. So I found that podcast. This is not my world normally. I'm a guy who works in construction and works, and hunts in the hills. I'd never heard a podcast before.
Wow.
So,
but the things you do when you're actually really, when you know that you need to do something for your health, right? Like, it changes you.
Yeah. It's quite open-minded, and so I found this podcast and I listened to it. And during that podcast, the woman interviewed, Lika, gave some specifics about what she had done to recover. So she did recover from long COVID, and she had quite debilitating symptoms similar to mine. It was over an extended period, but she was recovering. And so she gave me, she gave specific links, and a couple of them were to some references on Nicole Sachs' website about healing yourself. It was Healing Yourself, series 1 to 4. They were just 4 short videos, maybe 10 minutes each. And I thought, great, there's something else I can watch. And I discovered a path, you can say, to something to follow, from something that I could do. And I'd like to point out, it was probably, it was very important for me to find something that was really going to work, because I had such less energy. My greatest fear was finding something to follow, because there are 1,000 different ideas out there, but it being the wrong one, and me putting my limited energy into the wrong one and going the wrong track. So I really felt comfortable with what I seen there, and she talked a lot in that. She didn't go specifically about TMS, for instance, but she did talk about how there could be an emotional component to the symptoms that we're experiencing, and a relationship between what's going on in mind and what we're feeling physically is affecting me. So I really connected with that, because I had experience when I was very young, maybe 7 or 8 years old, where I used to get migraines on like clockwork, really, on a Sunday at 2 o'clock for between 1 and 2 years. And even as a child at that age, I knew somehow that it was something from within me. That it's not that I was to blame for them or responsible for them, but I knew that it wasn't something outside causing them. But they passed, and when I was reading this or listening to how she was describing it, I could make that connection about I've had something like that before. So to make the leap from, so I was, I'm pretty sure I know what was behind those. It was some things going on in my life at that time. So I feel that they were connected to some emotion that I was feeling at that time. So it was quite, I wouldn't say easy, but it made it easier for me to understand the connection between perhaps something that was physically going on in me in some emotional core or origin. So to make the leap from there to that, if I did something, had sort of like an emotional or psychological intervention that could reverse that or resolve them or help that, was not too difficult for me to believe.
Amazing.
And I was looking for something to believe.
And it is so important that you believe it, that you see these connections. Otherwise, you kind of can't go forward if you keep on persisting and saying, no, it's just the COVID, it's just this, it's just, the hormone or whatever. If you keep persisting along those lines, usually that's a block. But, you were able to look back at your past to make connections, and I think that's how it starts, really, seeing these things, really seeing them, making sense of them. Right.
Yeah, I think, two people could watch the same thing and come away with a totally different outlook, but I really connected with that. Also, it was rather, I think, a bold statement from her in this particular video, but she more or less implied that if I do if I do the things that are there, I will recover. It wasn't really in question. And I was just wanting someone to tell me what to do to recover.
Yeah.
So it wasn't blind belief. It wasn't like, oh yeah, I'll believe anything. I mean, I really believed it, but it was very reassuring to think that there's a positive outcome for me.
Yeah.
And parallel to that, there were already two people who, both Esther and Lika, who had done this and had recovered. So there was some tangible evidence.
And also, just one question, maybe when you look back in hindsight to when you started feeling these symptoms, because originally there were really some side effects from COVID, right? I mean, it lingers a little bit in the body. There's usually increased inflammation until it fully clears out. So I believe that there are real, side effects just from the infection itself. But can you think about how those maybe have transitioned into a mind-body process, maybe through your own fears or thoughts? Can you pinpoint anything in that regard? Because as you said yourself in the beginning, okay, you weren't feeling great, but it seemed to progress and get worse, the more time passed, which is usually like the opposite to how things work. When you first get an infection, things are bad and then they slowly progress.
Yeah, absolutely right. With hindsight now and a little more knowledge about the whole process, I can see there were several things that I did that were that maybe aided my recovery, but there were quite a few that hindered it. And so I was acutely aware of long COVID even before I had COVID, and I had a real fear of getting long COVID because I was reading about a young guy whose life was sort of heavily compromised by it. And I can remember even saying to my family, I don't mind getting COVID, but I really don't want to get long COVID.
Oh my.
So the seed was planted early.
Yes, it's brutal, right? When we're a little bit suggestible and then, like, we fear getting something, and then that's, it's how it builds up. Unfortunately, that's how it works for a lot of people. You get what you fear, which is horrible, but at least now you're aware of what happened. Yeah.
That's right. I got it. And and there was a number of other things. So I was, I was what we would call now, I would now call hypervigilance, but I would monitor my condition uh, like daily. I would in the first maybe 2 or 3 months because I was hoping to improve. I was wearing a heart rate monitor to prove to myself I was improved. To prove that I was getting better. But actually, what was coming out was that the results coming out were worse, and so that was generating definitely a fear. And if anyone asked how I was going, I would tell them the story of how bad I felt and what I had, which I see now is just reinforcing it, that I had a condition. And, I was putting fear into my own
Yes.
unconscious, if you like. I was doing quite a few things that weren't helpful. It was a bit scary because there was a time where I had no real control over what my mind was focusing on. So there were times when I really wanted to think positive, but the sort of the compromised mental part of me wouldn't allow me to put my mind on what I wanted to, and that was maybe the worst part because that would just lock into a very dark place, and I could see no way out.
It's the same, like, with depression. You should not think so negatively, but actually there is a real physical process happening in the brain. Like your chemicals are all, let's say, like all over the place. There's an imbalance. There's something going on chemically. So it's difficult to counter that just through willpower alone.
Yeah, absolutely spot on, Miriam. I see now what I was doing was scaring myself even more, and I also had doubts. I was starting to have doubts that I'm ever going to actually recover, and I was on a social media support group, which was. There was very little positive information. In fact, it was pretty much the opposite.
That's the problem with support groups.
It was really not. I eventually dropped off it, but I was really just looking for hope and inspiration on there. And there's somebody. I remember one person just posting like, "Oh, we've just read a report that anyone who has long COVID at 6 months still has it after 12," and I'm like, this is really not helpful. This is just sowing the seed of fear further. And, so I dropped off that, but I realised that that I was not helping myself in some of that. So what I did was I started doing a lot of the stuff that Nicole Sachs had recommended. A lot of that was to do with journaling, which was really quite valuable for me in the beginning, and I sort of dedicated my time to doing that. I would do some journaling on certain topics and stir some stuff up, and then it was recommended that you do some meditation afterwards just to have a break after it, but I wasn't really good at meditating, so I would do this breathing practice which had the same effect. So I sort of locked into that for a few weeks just to start. And then I did do a course of hers that I found, and it's basically just a complementary emotional exploration process, I guess. And for me, it was very valuable. It was looking at things in a different way, and writing letters that you never seen, different tools.
Same thing that I did, yeah.
Just from a different approach, and also illustrations rather than writing. Sometimes for people who identify more maybe visually than words. So I did that, and that was really good. I was starting to notice my symptoms were intensifying sometimes, So it wasn't always going in the right direction. And they would maybe swap out for something else. And I actually went to my doctor during that phase. We had an appointment planned, and she asked what I was doing, and I said, I'm doing this. And she said, how do you feel? And I said, I actually feel terrible. And she says, what do you think of that, about that then? And I said, I actually think it's doing me good. I think it's stirring something up. Because I know it's only happening from the process of what I'm doing.
That's amazing.
So she was really supportive of me, encouraged me. I know a lot of doctors are not quite as understanding, but she actually gave me a lot of support at that time, which I really felt was valuable for me. And so I did these exercises, and then one of the exercises was drawing your symptoms and labeling them. And I sort of, although I had a lot of things that were difficult to express, at the end I labeled these, and the labels were fear and doubt were the two things that I was left with at the end. And that was a bit of a revelation for me, because I don't know how those words came out on this illustration I did. And there was a pure coincidence, but I was starting to explore some other things online at that time, and I found Dr. Harold Schubiner and his website, and I was watching a couple of videos of his. And that same night, I watched one of his, which addressed specifically fear and doubt. And I was like, this is just a bit too amazing. And basically gave me tools on how to address that. And so that was really the turning point for me, because I realized that I had sort of got to the core of where my emotional issues were, probably, and had processed through them. But I was still carrying my symptoms because of this fear loop, where I was experiencing my symptom, being fearful of it, being afraid of it, and I now know that is picked up by a sort of danger alert system, and keeps me in that wired state. Keeps my autonomic nervous system, wired up. So I learned tools from that. About how to change my reaction to my symptoms, and a few other good tools like affirmations. I took a lot of this on board, but I really believed it would make a difference. And it wasn't like an overnight thing, but within a few weeks, I was able to start doing things physically. And if I was doing something physically and started to feel fatigue, I was realizing it was a trigger from doing the activity rather than exhaustion from the activity. So identifying the trigger and being able to chant to myself that this exertion I used to tell myself it was keeping me safe, and that it would keep me safe afterwards as well, because I was trying to send a message of safety. And it was important to tell myself I was safe afterwards as well, because I was experiencing post-exertional malaise at one time, which was fine when I was doing the activity, but the next day or 2 days later, I would have a huge crash. So I went about sending these signals to myself. I think anyone who probably seen me on the street would have thought I was a bit mad, because I was talking to myself.
You have to talk to yourself, right, sometimes.
But often doing the activity, riding a bike, or starting to actually get out and do things a little bit, nothing strenuous, but just exercise, and starting to see evidence that I wouldn't say it's not real, but I was starting to see that these symptoms are things that were starting to turn on and off, and that they weren't consistent.
Yeah, and it's really key what you said there, that you recognize that the activity was a trigger and not the cause in itself. That's a huge one, and it applies to, all cases, all symptoms of mind-body syndrome, right? When we blame the symptoms on an activity or on the weather or on food, right? You have to recognize, no, these are triggers, right? It's triggering the symptom. It's not the cause in itself, because otherwise we lose all of our power, right? We give away our power to the trigger, which isn't really the cause. So it's really important to recognize that, okay, I am being triggered, but because I've grown to maybe subconsciously believe that this is dangerous and there's a process going on and my nervous system is dysregulated, but, really and truly, it's my nervous system dysregulation that is making me responsive to these triggers. It's not the activity in itself. And that's a huge one, because that gives you empowerment, and you know that you can actually do something to change.
You're right. It was a real breakthrough for me, actually, identifying those things, and believing that it was the trigger.
Yeah.
And that allowed me to do more things, and slowly, it actually wasn't so slowly, over a relatively short time of just a few weeks. I was able to do a lot of physical things. What did happen was, so as I sort of would nail one of my symptoms here or there, it would pop out as something else. And I do remember getting extreme anxiety at one time, where I'd sort of overcome my fatigue, and then the next day I had anxiety such as I've never felt before. For a few days it was almost unbearable, but I knew what it was, but I just didn't really know how to treat the anxiety. I know it's another symptom, but it is more difficult for me to change my relationship to that symptom as it was to maybe feeling a physical one. But nevertheless, I did try to not focus on the symptoms and just try and keep on the process. And eventually one day I just came home and I said, I'm all over this now. I'm fixed. I just came home to my wife and says, I'm done. And I went for a 3-hour hike and climb and came back. I wasn't sure, but I was pretty confident that I wasn't going to have any fallout from it.
It's that confidence that's really needed in the end. That's really inspiring. It was, you said, like, I'm done. This is it. You were much more sure than you were before. And that's what really does it. As you said before, it's like the fear and the doubt, most of all, that keeps a lot of people stuck. Once you realize that this is going to work and you just go out and say, like, yeah, this is it. I can do this, whatever activity. And if you can build up that certainty, almost certainty, let's say, that you're going to be okay, that's when I think the major breakthroughs happen. At least it was the same for me and for many people I've spoken to. So, yeah, that's really inspiring.
Yeah, it was. And just to finish, I guess about a week later, so I did have no fallout from that. I was really happy. It was not all my symptoms cleared up at that time, but physically most of them had. But the following week, there was like a last-ditch attack at me, these fatigue, and it was as bad as it had ever been. And I was sort of devastated. I thought, I'm over this, but here it is back again, maybe. And the doubt started to come in, maybe I got it all wrong. And, but I was like, no, I just not going to, I don't believe in this. So it lasted 2 days and then it disappeared. It just went. And my cognitive side, my concentration in it took a little longer. It was easier to measure my physical symptoms because you just can't. But I thought I'd recovered mentally or cognitively already, but it was maybe a month later where I realised I was much better a month later than I was then, because you don't know what you don't know at that time. So it took a bit longer, but nevertheless, since that time, I haven't had a recurrence of any of those symptoms, which is 18 months now since I recovered.
Amazing. That's really amazing. And it's great that, even though you still got this relapse like a week later and it was as bad as in the beginning, you knew that, that this was also surmountable because you also had enough proof already that you'd improved. I think that really helps, at least personally, like if you get symptoms again, and you can look back and see how you had improved before and that this is not permanent, I think that already helps. The most important thing is that you don't fall into the trap of thinking that, everything has failed now or you are totally wrong, because that's the worst thing. And unfortunately, it's difficult because, it's the disappointment is huge when you get symptoms again or when you're starting to recover and then you have a bad day or a bad week. But it's important to stay firm in the knowing that, no, this is still going to be okay. Maybe my nervous system is still a little bit on alert. Maybe there was a trigger. It could be an emotional trigger. Stuff happens in life, but at least you make sense of it and it's going to go away.
Absolutely, and whilst those symptoms are long gone, there have been little flare-ups of new things because life goes on for me. So that and it's been educational for me. So now, if I had a pain in my hip last year, and I couldn't work out what that was, but there was something going on in my life at that time, and I applied the same principles to it. I tried to get to the bottom of it and change my relationship to the symptom, and eventually got, it just resolved. It was, and there's been other little bits and pieces. So I'm not, there's still life going on, but I know what's going on now, and I've got some really good tools to deal with it.
Okay, amazing. And what you said applies, as you said, like it applied to your hip and this almost the same way that it applied to your other symptoms. So this is something I like to stress a lot because a lot of people kind of get hooked into their specific symptom. Like say like, oh, but has anyone else suffered from exactly this symptom or exactly that? But the thing is that, this approach, the underlying factors are common to all mind-body symptoms, no matter where the symptom is, Underlying all of these symptoms are always fear and doubt, most of the time, Sometimes also, of course, emotional anger from life triggers and dissatisfaction, but the underlying factors are common no matter what symptoms you have, and it's important not to get lost in the specificity of the symptoms because that's, I find it's a huge block.
Yeah. I mean, it's some of the severity of the symptoms. I really think, gosh, could it really just be a mind-body symptom? So it's not the first place I go, and I'm sure a lot of people don't. But having a better understanding now of what potentially can be caused in the body in a number of areas, I do consider it now. So it's amazing what you can do with it. Very powerful.
Yes. So thanks so much, Gary, for sharing this with us. I'm sure a lot of people will find it helpful, especially, those who are still struggling from long COVID, but also those who might be suffering from things like chronic fatigue syndrome, brain fog, which are similar symptoms to long COVID. Again, as I said before, it sometimes doesn't matter what symptoms you have. If you look at your underlying causes, you will find the answer. If you're open to this approach, you will find the answers. And Gary, just in case someone wants to speak to you, seek support, is there any way they can contact you?
Yes, I don't have a website at the moment, although I'm trying to put something together because I'm helping a few people. I have an email address which someone is welcome to write to if they would like some information. It's lcrecoverynz@gmail.com. So LC for long COVID, recovery NZ for New Zealand, at gmail.com. So if anyone has any questions, or I try to get back to everyone who contacts me.
And just one other thing, perhaps, which I forgot to ask you about. I know that the other day you told me that you had tried to share your story on certain support groups, and that you were blocked from these groups. What do you think about this? What happened?
Yeah, it was very frustrating. So one of the things I was so excited about when I did recover was I was really looking forward to be able to post on the support group that I was a member of. So basically, my story was written on one of these websites now, and so I just wanted to post a short message saying, "Look, I've recovered. If anyone's interested, here's a link to my story." I was taken off the website. It was deemed too controversial, and they hadn't even read my story. It was just that's not what they wanted.
It's weird, right? Like, it's a support group for people who, internally they want to recover, but then at the same time, some people reject the idea that recovery is totally possible. I mean, I have a lot of theories about that, and I don't want to sound offensive, but sometimes I wonder, like the identity we build with a condition, we get so attached sometimes to that identity that if someone else comes and tells us, like, no, it could be otherwise, automatically first you reject it. It's crazy, but it happens.
Yeah. I feel it's a little sad because I mean, one of the reasons that they mentioned to me was that it's a support group only, and I did lobby to them and said, look, I think a lot of people there would like hope to hear of people who have recovered, even if they don't want to follow specifically the route. But that's I think there is some comfort in people in their own situation, but I can't change that. I think it's just a little unfortunate because there's a great pool of people suffering there who yes. Maybe even if one in 100 got some benefit out of it, would be.
Yeah, but I mean, now lately I've come to believe that, if that 1 in 100 is open-minded, he or she will find a way, she'll find a way to the spot anyway. That's what I hope, at least, So we can only hope that more and more people over the years will accept this.
Yeah. Well, you're doing a good job of spreading the message. So.
Yeah, and thank you for helping me with that. Okay. All right. So, Gary, thanks so much for being with me here today. Anything else you'd like to add before we go?
Not really. All I can say is that for someone who was not familiar with this world of mind-body healing at all, if it can work for me, I think it can work for just about anybody, and it's a very powerful. It's a very powerful concept when you have the ability to know you have the ability to heal yourself. Yes. This is really a very empowering place to be.
Yeah, totally changes you, and you can't unlearn what you learn. So it's like life-changing. Amazing. Okay, Gary, thank you so much. I wish you a nice evening over there in New Zealand. And that's it for today. I'll see you all again next time.
Thanks, Maria.
Bye-bye.